Yeah, start this day. Nothing can go wrong today. Oh yeah, the video's supposed to come out. How am I gonna get over there? Bet I can make that. Maybe that wasn't such a good idea. I'm gonna be filming that for a few days. Well, I wonder what they're playing today. Let's go see. Hey, I'm Will.
And I'm Chris.
We're the Rat Boys. Today we begin our journey into the Resident Evil series. Just to preface this, we're not new to the series as a whole.
First up is Resident Evil 0.
I've played through this game a few times over the years.
However, this is my first experience with the game.
Before we get into it, let's review our grading process.
We take 11 categories every game shares and grade each individual aspect separately.
We then average those scores together, creating our overall personal scores.
Lastly, we average our scores together to create the final combined score.
So with that out of the way, let's get into it.
Originally released in 2002 and re-released in 2016, Resident Evil 0 is still readily available on PC, Switch, PS4, and the Xbox One, costing between $20 and $40.
Developed and published by Capcom, creators of Devil May Cry, Monster Hunter, Dead Rising, and many, many more.
Resident Evil 0 is a survival horror game. Other similar games include Signalis, Alyssa, and Silent Hill.
This game is currently the first game chronologically in the canon series, and takes around 10 to 13 hours to beat on a typical first-time playthrough.
The story of Resident Evil 0 takes players back to 1998, with reports of unusual murders on the outskirts of Raccoon City. The city's special forces, STARS, sends Bravo team to investigate with rookie Rebecca in tow. If I didn't read this, I'd personally have no idea the original objective for the game was to investigate murders in the woods. You land, find a train, immediately get abandoned by your teammates, and you never see them again.
I never saw him again.
Steam goes on to say, later on the train you meet up with Billy Cohen, a wanted criminal. You control Rebecca and Billy at the same time, swapping back and forth, solving puzzles, and surviving the nightmares that lie ahead. Overall, this is the game. Rebecca and Billy team up and Scooby-Doo the mansion.
Mechanically, you control both characters at the same time, sometimes having to separate to achieve your goals. This works, for the most part. There are times when trying to navigate where the fixed camera angles are pretty rough when running both characters away from a threat, or even just trying to pick things up on the ground, which you'll be doing a lot of. Unlike in the other titles, there's no storage box in this game, so you'll be leaving a lot of your stuff on the ground. Besides all that, you'll be dealing with the typical things that many of these games do. Not being able to aim and move at the same time, having a generally hard time aiming at anything, having to combine and trade items mid-combat, and of course, having to fight the fixed camera angles every step of the way.
Your gameplay here consists of old-school fixed camera angles, inventory management, and figuring out a whole bunch of puzzles, usually all at the same time. Meanwhile, you're dealing with a pretty large variety of enemies that want you dead. Some cutscenes are informative to the story. Others are a little goofy.
And this was my favorite cutscene. Okay.
Yeah, he knew exactly which two leeches controlled all the other leeches.
Are you okay?
Regardless, both look good and are entertaining. Voice lines are cheesy and on par with the older games. Whether this is intentional or not, it brings a certain charm to the game.
Being able to control both characters in game with both analog sticks is a great boon to the game. It helps with navigating tight spaces against enemies or getting out of sticky situations. Is this a part of the clock puzzle too?
Could be.
Stand up!
Birds!
Run, Billy!
I like the idea that even though Chris can't move, he's just sending Billy off to an unknown area. Moreover, the idea of controlling two characters at the same time, swapping back and forth to complete goals in concept, is pretty cool. However, in practice, it's hit or miss. There are times when it works, and having the extra support in combat is helpful. Then there's every other time. Either way, I appreciate the attempt. Resident Evil 0 doesn't have official chapters to note progress. However, the changes in area of the game really makes you feel the progression.
Each area being unique with a wide diversity between the areas.
Some games make it seem like you're just going around and around in circles over and over again, not ever being sure if you're changing anything. This game doesn't have the same effect. There's quite a few bosses in the game. Yes, most of them don't make sense and are out of place, but there's a lot of them in comparison to other games in the genre. You could view this as a negative, but for me it feels like a way to keep you wary and on your toes. Though many of them are annoying, none of them feel too overpowering, even on hard, at least for me.
But seriously though, whack that boy. Cheap boss.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of just a trash boss. Like, I don't know. The layouts of all the areas are pretty good for the most part. There's a few questionable layouts, specifically on the in-game save rooms, but generally there's a ton of shortcuts that make your transit shorter through the progression of the game. Oh boy, the inventory management in this game is straight rat poo. Usually in these games you have a limited inventory space, but you also get a storage box to counteract this. In this game you get 6 inventory slots between each character, but between the 12 slots, it's nowhere near enough. What this results in is rat packing all of your items to each save room and dropping them all over the ground, making every save room look like your sister's bedroom. This is by far the most time-consuming part of the game and is almost unavoidable. One of the most annoying parts about any game in this style is flying and knee-high enemies, and this game has droves of them. Monkeys, bats, dogs, birds, and bugs. They're everywhere. If you don't know the reason why these are so annoying, it's because it's really hard to gauge whether to aim up, down, or straight ahead. On top of that, they're usually fast, and they never come alone. This adds to the challenge of the game, but in a pretty annoying way.
Jank. At certain points I'm fighting with the camera more than enemies. They did give the option to continue running the same direction by holding that direction down, but it's basically hardwired in my brain because of these games that I should switch direction, and it always screws me over.
When controlling a character, the other character shoots on their own, and you can move them independently, but in the heat of battle, they tend to waste ammo or just stand there watching you get eaten. You really have to micromanage the AI a lot to be somewhat effective. The biggest issue is getting attacked when trying to move room to room. If an NPC is engaged in combat or is grabbed, and you leave the room, they will not follow. This creates some potentially frustrating scenarios where you have to go in and out of the same room over and over again while being eaten up by the enemy. This is just a minor annoyance, but it's consistent throughout the entire game. Keys to doors are automatically used when needed, but every other type of key item has to be selected in inventory while standing in the exact spot that it's needed in. This is just annoying. Just don't use items automatically or use all items automatically. Going to a door and being able to open it, and then going to a drawer that needs a key and having to go into the inventory to use the key is just bad. Aiming has generally always been a challenge in these types of games, but that doesn't take away from the annoyances it brings. What makes it noteworthy whenever it comes to this game is the camera angles. They are particularly bad in this game. Throwing Molotovs, on the other hand, is way worse. You cannot adjust the aiming for throwing items. They have a set distance and cannot be aimed up or down. This creates some pretty awkward moments whenever you're surrounded by enemies.
Personally, I take the middle ground as more of a suggestions box. I think the game would have been better as a co-op, personally. Feels like it was built for it, but they just filled that space with a computer who isn't always actively doing things to help. That, or alternatively, make it to where the secondary character isn't there quite as often as they are already. After playing a good portion of the game on hard difficulty for the first day, and then watching the remainder of the game be played through our stream, I tried the game on normal. It could be because of seeing the entire game on hard, but I feel like they should have honestly taken more items away from the player.
First and foremost, this game, like many others in the genre, is a puzzle game. I'd say almost half of the items you pick up in this game are meant for some kind of puzzle. So if you don't like puzzle games, maybe find a different genre. Now, what is the quality of these puzzles? Well, most are fine. There may be 2 or 3 puzzles that are annoying to deal with throughout the entire game. Overall, I've dealt with worse, but I've also seen better. This game is pretty old school. Don't expect autosaves. Matter of fact, your saves are limited and can only be used at save station, which in this series takes place in the form of typewriters. Enemies are unforgiving and unfair at times. Fixed camera angles will take time and practice to get used to. Tank controls are going to be challenging at first if you haven't grown up with them. However, they're smoothed out in this compared to other similar control styles. And finally, picking up and choosing what to use and carry will take some forethought. I personally play survival horror games on hard, period. That's my personal preference. That being said, this game is generally a bit more difficult compared to the others in the same style. The sheer number of enemies and lack of early game heals and the amount of bosses in this game requires you to think about what your moment-to-moment decisions are. On medium, things are a lot more manageable for the newcomers, but if you're like me, expect a few retries on hard.
The game has decent cutscenes riddled throughout the story, and honestly they do work very well, even though they are corny. And the overall graphics of the game aren't terrible. Nothing seems to glitch out with character models, nor do items phase out of bounds that I found. I'll give it a 9 out of 10 rats, baby.
Does this game still hold up in the graphics department? I would say yes. Games made in this style use a static image environment that, while has its limitations, made visually lasting games. The cutscenes are still good, blood still looks good. I personally have no gripes whenever it comes to this. Are they AAA grade graphics? No. It's a 22-year-old game, and it's been 8 years since it's got a remaster. I think that this game will continue to stand the test of time for years to come. What holds it back for me is its sometimes awkward and lackluster cutscene. That might be more of a story issue overall, because I feel like they could have done more whenever it comes to the cutscene. I give the visuals for this game 7 rats.
Everything sounds pretty good. Guns had the sound you would expect for how old the game is. The music is very well placed in my opinion. When it needed to be rushed, it was rushed. When it was calm, it was calm. When there was suspense that needed to be conveyed through music, the music conveyed that properly in that sense. I'd give that a 7 rats.
Audio is on point. Zombies still make classic sounds and it still holds up. Every enemy has its own sounds. You can tell what enemies are in the room, how many there are, and to an extent, how close they are. Guns are pretty basic. None really sound out of place from what I could tell. Music scores are decent. They do a really good job in building ominence in some areas. No one track really stands out one way or the other. 7 rats.
It was really corny, to be honest, but ultimately I expect that from Resident Evil most of the time. As a first playthrough and being able to enjoy it as such, there were some things that just didn't work out in my opinion. Wesker and Birkin working together, no explanation of who Spencer is, except in notes kind of, but most notes were talking about the virus, or how the virus was being created. Left Spencer and everything else as a mystery until the very end. But even then, he was just some scientist that worked on the T-virus. 4 out of 10 rats, Chief. Take it or leave it.
The story does its job. It was made to set up the first Resident Evil game, and it does. As a standalone story, it's pretty weak. It may get you interested in to continue the story in the next game. You'll definitely not know who is who for the most part if this is your first introduction to the series. It doesn't help that this game stars the 2 most forgettable main characters in the entire franchise, which is unfortunate because they could have more going on with them in future titles. Overall, I give the story of this game a 4 rats. They really should have made the characters stand out more, and maybe spread out some more lore in the notes. There's some insight in the notes, but it's all still pretty bland. It was cool to learn a few things, but it just wasn't enough.
It wasn't bad. It wasn't all over the place, but the geography for this game is really weird. It made the pacing feel weird. Somehow you're just underneath the main mansion that the game takes place in for roughly 2/3 of the game. It's just an average game when it comes to pacing. So yeah, as average expects, it's 5 rats.
I enjoyed the pacing here. The levels opened up with well-placed shortcuts for the most part. Enemies evolved a bit, whether it was annoying or not is irrelevant. Puzzles were decent as far as opening new areas. Each area in the game was pretty distinct from the last. The only thing that slows this game down is the item management. For that, this is a 6 rats for pacing. If the item thing and some room locations were better, it'd be more like an 8.
Honestly, I didn't like it. Felt like they really wanted to make a co-op game, but ultimately decided to make the game the way they did. Probably wouldn't have irked me so much if your partner just came through the door with you even if they got smacked. I can understand being held in place by a grab, but getting hit and deciding to stay in the previous room and taking continuous damage is just trash. 4 out of 10 rats for that one, Rat Kings.
The gameplay here fluctuates between okay to bad. If you didn't have to deal with the item rat packing, you still have all the annoying enemies, bad camera angles, the keys and key items situation, along with having to babysit your NPC. I personally try to play this game with the least amount of usage of the other character as much as possible. Even though I appreciate the attempt with the multiple character usage, it's just annoying to deal with. These aspects are so annoying that I give the gameplay 4 rats. What would I fix? The storage system for one, otherwise, less small enemies, better AI for the partner. If these were fixed, this could be a 6 rats.
Mechanics and gameplay blend in my opinion, but with what I said earlier about being able to control both characters with 2 analogs, that's a great thing for the game. But the getting hit and staying out of the room they're going to, that's just so awful. Mechanically though, it's what I expect of old Resident Evil, but I'm still gonna give it a 5 rats.
What to say about the mechanics? Some people hate fixed camera angles. I usually don't mind it much. However, this game has bad fixed camera angles. Almost every fight has a high likeliness to put you in a spot between 2 or more angles, where either one of them still doesn't show what's after you. Even that can be forgiven. What can't be forgiven is the inventory management. If it was less prevalent, it wouldn't have been as bad, but it's a consistent problem. The lack of storage is just too noticeable. The controlling of 2 characters is cool, on paper, but for me it falls very flat. Fundamentally, every addition to this game from previous installments is flawed. I would give the mechanics for this game a 3 out of 10 rats.
There's almost no real character development. What I would consider character development is actual change of character as the game goes on. I guess weapon growth in this case. You get one single item that makes your weapons better in this game, and it has to be given to one of the 2 starter pistols. As for actual character growth, Billy has one scene mid-game in the mansion's basement where he confesses about his past somewhat to Rebecca, but he doesn't make big changes from this. It stays the same basically. The end also has some character growth, but it's also cookie cutter. They go their separate ways. So this is also an average thing for me. 5 out of 10.
There's practically no development here. Characters exist only to push the singular story. There was a brief moment where there could be some growth, but it was squandered. I didn't feel like anyone learned anything about anything at the end of the game. I'll leave it at that. I give it a 2 rats.
Ultimately, there's not a lot of world development, but with the things that change, there's a few that are pretty good changes that can save you a decent amount of time, but most of these changes just make it to where you can now backtrack to places that aren't even necessary to backtrack to. And one of these changes is kind of a shortcut, which that one is the water being drained to create a small walkway. I'll give it a 5 rats.
The varieties of areas, shortcuts, and the overarching story for the lore as a whole is really nice here. This game brings some really nice details for future titles, lore-wise. As far as the self-contained world, I enjoyed it. As stated before, there aren't any official chapters in this game, but you know whenever you're moving on. For that, I give this subject a 6 out of 10 rats.
This game felt way too much like a babysitter for me. Having to take care of another character while taking care of mine. The carrying items from one place to another constantly when you change chapter or areas. This game is like a 3 out of 10 on the funometer for me. I didn't hate the game, but it wasn't fun.
I've played this game a few times in the past, so I knew what to expect. With that being said, I don't really love playing this game, but it's not terrible either. It was nice to be refreshed on the story, and I like Rebecca as a character, and these old-style survival horror games have a soft spot in my heart. With all that taken into consideration, unfortunately for me, this is just a middle-of-the-road 5. It's still old-school Resident Evil, but with some really annoying mechanics. Even with the game being an older title, they could have done better. I know this because I've played older and better games in the same series.
It actually is replayable. Like, genuinely has some things that could make a lot of people that enjoyed the game come back to the game to unlock at a later date. You've got Leech Hunter mode, you've got Wesker mode, you got the unlocks for beating the game at specific times. I'd give it like an 8 out of 10 rats for replayability. I'm sure each of these modes could be fun if you put the time in for them.
There's a lot going on here if you give this game multiple plays. There are 2 unlockable modes, a grade scoring system, and unlockables for the future playthroughs. Unfortunately, I don't see myself wanting to play through this game enough to really enjoy these perks. This game is pretty long compared to others in the series, which is fine for a single go, but not so much for future plays. There's too many little annoying aspects in this game for me to personally go through it more frequently. I still appreciate the effort for those who would put in the work to unlock all of this, but for me, it's 6 out of 10 rats.
I honestly never got to finish the game. I missed out on that train when I took on playing the game on hard mode first time. I got so frustrated that I just walked away from the game and let Will beat it out that night. But from what I saw when the game ended, and we panned over the cliff to see the real mansion in the distance, was disappointment. I don't hate this game as much as it sounds like I do, but it wasn't great for me. Ultimately, I'd give my final feelings as a 4 out of 10.
At the end of my 12-hour playthrough after years from my last, I felt pretty underwhelmed overall. The end is just that, an ending. It got better in the second half in all aspects, but overall, I just felt like the game happened. 5 rats.
My score for the game in average was 5.4. which honestly felt like it would have been quite a bit lower ultimately compared to my feelings overall for the game, especially as the game went on. This feels like a fair score if I'm taking away my personal feelings and literally basing it all on the scores averaged.
With all of my scores put together and averaged, my final score comes to a bare minimum 5. This game had a chance to be one of the best in the series, but unfortunately, they went a pretty baseline route. They stepped outside the line a little bit, but not enough for me. They showed that they didn't really care about the characters and made some questionable mechanical decisions. But if you're going through the entire series, there's no reason to skip this game. So with that, our combined final score comes to a mediocre 5.2. This is an average game. There's not much here to really remember, but it does start off the RE franchise canonically. If you're not trying to go through the entire Resident Evil series, there's no reason to play this game. As far as value goes, stick with the cheapest version. And even then, maybe wait for a sale. Otherwise, there's the GameCube version out there to be plundered. Before we wrap things up, we have some mods for you. First up, and probably the most important mod to get, is Item Box by Descod. This mod is a rat godsend to many issues I have with this game. If you can make it work, this turns every save spot into a storage box, a must-have for any pack rat. For you challenge runner and cheaters out there, we have Resident Evil 0 HD Remaster Trainer by Dante and Razor. This mod offers a bunch of cheats for the game. This could open up a lot of challenge options, or just turn the game into a baby mode if you don't want to deal with whatever it is. Our next 3 mods are all reshades to give a more updated cinematic experience. First, we have Photorealistic Resident Evil 0 with no film grain by Epic Awesome Mods. This reshade cuts all the grain and makes the game have a more earthy look. Next, we have the Genesis reshade by KWZ. This reshade cuts grain, increases sharpness, and has very dark tones compared to vanilla. And lastly, we have the realistic reshade Resident Evil 0 by Cinnamem. Sorry, bro. Our final reshade brings out some of the deeper tones in the game and gives the game a more natural tone.
And that concludes our review of Resident Evil 0, which will be the start of the reviews for the entire series. So be sure to subscribe and like if this content is in the area of your rat nest. And if you disagree with our opinions, or have suggestions, or want us to play a specific game to review, let us know in the comments. About once a week right now, we play a game on Fridays, Saturdays, over on our Twitch channel, RatKing0, or you can check our other channel for our archived Twitch videos at Boi Archive. Until next time,
Rat Boys out. Must have fell asleep. What are you looking at? I'm hungry. What do you got? Food? Let me see. That still hurts. Give me that food.